The year was 1882, and in the dying light of a New Mexico sunset, a woman stood at the edge of her porch, eyes fixed on the horizon. Not on the man standing behind her with a ring in his hand. She wasn't looking at the gold. She wasn't looking at the promise of a fine house, a full table, or a name that carried weight across 3 counties. She was looking at the dust. Because somewhere out there, past the red mesas and the dry riverbeds, past the ghost towns and the graves, there was a man riding toward her. Or at least she prayed there was. His name was Cole Maddox, a cowboy, a drifter, a man who owned nothing but a horse, a worn saddle, and a letter she had written him 6 months ago, a letter he may never have received. And the man behind her, the man with the ring, was Harlan Price, the wealthiest rancher in Lincoln County, a man who smiled like a preacher and moved like a storm you didn't see coming until your roof was already gone. He had given her until sundown to decide. The sun was almost gone. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Sending love your way. This is a story about love, greed, desperation, and what happens when time runs out before the right person arrives. Hold on tight, because this one doesn't let go. Red Spur, New Mexico. It wasn't much of a town. Never had been. It sat low in a basin between 2 ridges, like something the land had coughed up and forgotten about. The main street was a single stretch of cracked dirt lined with a general store, a livery, a church with a broken bell, and a saloon that smelled like sawdust and old regrets. Most people who passed through Red Spur kept on moving. The ones who stayed, well, they had their reasons, usually not good ones. But Clara Holt had been born here, and she intended to die here. She just hadn't expected the dying to feel so close, so soon. Clara was 24 years old. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubbornness, which was both her greatest strength and the thing most likely to get her killed. She ran the Holt Ranch, 200 acres of dry grass and stubborn cattle, on her own since her father passed the winter before. No hands left, no money to hire any. Just Clara, a borrowed horse named Biscuit, and enough sheer will to keep the place breathing. The ranch sat 3 miles east of town. It wasn't grand. The fence posts leaned at odd angles. The barn needed a new roof. The well was running shallow. But it had been her family's land for 30 years, and she wasn't going to give it up. Not to the bank. Not to the drought. And not to Harlan Price. Harlan Price rode into Red Spur 8 months ago like a man who already owned the place and was just waiting for everyone else to figure it out. He came with money from somewhere back east, bought up 2 failing ranches, hired a crew of men who never smiled and always wore their guns low, and set up operations like a general preparing for a long campaign. He was 41 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver streaking his dark hair at the temples and a jaw like carved stone. He was handsome in the way that expensive knives are handsome, clean and precise and made to cut. He had a way of talking to people that made them feel both flattered and afraid at the same time. Like he was complimenting you while deciding whether you were useful. He had first come to Clara's door 6 months ago. Brought flowers. Real ones, not the dried-up things that grew along the road. He tipped his hat, smiled that slow smile, and told her she was the most beautiful woman in Lincoln County, which was true but also felt like the opening move in a chess game she hadn't agreed to play. She had thanked him for the flowers and told him she was busy. He'd come back the week after, then the week after that. And somewhere in those visits, between her struggling to keep the ranch alive and the bank sending letters with very small, very serious print, Harlan had made her an offer. Not just of marriage. An offer of salvation. He would pay off the bank debt. Every cent. He would hire hands, fix the fence line, repair the barn, and make the Holt Ranch prosperous again. Richer than it had ever been under her father. All she had to do was become Mrs. Harlan Price. Clara had said she needed time to think. Harlan had said, "Of course," but his eyes said something else entirely. Now 6 months had passed. The bank's final letter had arrived 2 weeks ago. The date of foreclosure was 3 weeks away. And Harlan had appeared on her porch yesterday evening with a gold ring and an ultimatum wrapped in a polite tone. "I've been patient, Clara," he'd said. More patient than most men would be. I need your answer by tomorrow evening. Sundown. She had stood at that porch and said nothing. And after he rode away, she went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and unfolded a letter she had read so many times the creases were soft as cloth. It was the last letter she'd received from Cole Maddox, dated 7 months ago, from a cattle drive-up in Colorado. His handwriting was rough and slanted, the words simple and honest in the way that only people with no interest in impressing you ever manage to be. Clara, the drive finishes end of month. After that, I'm done with the trail. Got enough saved to buy a small piece of land if I'm careful. I've been thinking about you every mile of this ride. Thinking about Red Spur. Thinking about whether you'd want me back. I know I don't have much to offer, but I'd give you everything I have and work every day to make it more. If you still want me to come back, write me at the post in Durango. I'll be there till mid-October. I'll wait for your word. Cole. She had written back the same day she received it. Told him to come. Told him she wanted him back. Told him about the ranch and the bank and the trouble with Harlan, though she hadn't used his name. Just said there was pressure coming and she needed him to hurry. That letter had gone to the post in Durango. October had passed. November. December. No reply. No Cole. She didn't know if her letter arrived. She didn't know if his feelings had changed. She didn't know if something had happened to him on that drive. The trail was a dangerous thing. Men fell off it for all kinds of reasons. Some of them got back up. Some didn't. But she still looked at the horizon every evening. Because Cole Maddox had told her he would come back. And in her experience, Cole Maddox was one of the few men in this world who meant exactly what he said. The question was whether meaning it was enough. The sun was beginning its slow fall toward the ridgeline as Clara carried a bucket of water to the barn that evening. She paused at the barn door, squinting west into the orange light. The road was empty. Still empty. She went back inside, sat at the table, and placed the gold ring Harlan had left on her porch beside Cole's letter. 2 futures, sitting side by side. And by tomorrow night she would have to choose one. Cole Maddox hadn't slept in 36 hours. He was somewhere in the Sangre de Cristo foothills, pushing a horse that deserved better than this pace, riding south through terrain that was rocky, cold, and unforgiving in the way only high desert could be. The kind of land that looked beautiful from a distance and tried to kill you up close. He had left Durango 3 days ago. He had left because of a letter. Not Clara's letter, though God knows he'd been waiting for that. He'd left because of a different letter entirely. One that reached him through a chain of posts and forwarded hands the way only urgent things managed to travel in that part of the world. It had come from a man named Eli Graft, an old saddle partner of Cole's from his early trail days, who now lived in a settlement 20 miles north of Red Spur and did a little of everything: postmaster, barkeep, occasional lawman when the county got desperate enough. Eli had written 3 lines. Cole, girl named Clara Holt has been asking the post about letters from you. Heard her name tied to Harlan Price. If you know her and you care, you better not drag your feet. Price doesn't wait for things. He takes them. That was all. 3 lines. But Cole had read them standing in the doorway of a rooming house in Durango, and by the time he reached the end, he was already calculating the distance. 2 days hard riding if conditions held. 3 if they didn't. He'd left within the hour. Cole was 30 years old, lean, sun-darkened, with hands that had worked rope and iron for most of his adult life. His face had the kind of stillness you see in men who've spent years alone, reading landscapes instead of people. He wasn't a talkative man, but he wasn't a cold one either. People who knew him, really knew him, understood that the quiet was just the surface. Underneath it ran something deep and steady, like water moving through rock. He had known Clara Holt since they were children, grown up 6 miles apart, gone to the same one-room schoolhouse, ridden the same trails along the foothills. They'd spent years circling each other in that careful way young people do when they feel something they're not ready to name. By the time Cole was old enough to name it, he was already on the trail, working cattle drives to earn his stake, telling himself he'd come back with enough to offer her something real. He had been telling himself that for 6 years. And now here he was, riding south through the cold dark, wondering if he'd told himself that story for too long. He reached the northern edge of Lincoln County just before dawn. The sky behind him was still black, but the east was beginning to show that deep blue that comes before the gray. He pulled the horse to a stop at a ridge overlooking the valley below and looked out over the land. Somewhere down there was Red Spur, somewhere down there was Clara. And somewhere down there, he figured, was Harlan Price. Cole had heard of Price. News on the cattle trail traveled in strange ways, but it traveled, and the name Harlan Price had come up more than once in conversations at campfires. A man with money and ambition and a habit of acquiring things, land, livestock, people. A man who had come out of somewhere back east with a past that nobody had been able to dig up clearly, which was itself a kind of answer. Men with nothing to hide don't work that hard to hide it. Cole nudged the horse forward and started down the ridge. He made it to the flatlands by full sunrise and pushed on through the morning. The country here was open and dry, red dust rising with every stride, the sparse scrub grass bent flat by a wind coming out of the west. A hawk circled high above him, riding thermals with lazy patience. Cole watched it for a moment and thought about patience, about how it could be a virtue or a failure depending on when you ran out of it. He was watering the horse at a shallow creek when he heard hooves on the road above the creek bank. He didn't move toward his gun. Not yet, but his hand moved closer to it. Two riders crested the bank and pulled up short when they saw him. They were young, mid-20s maybe, with the look of hired men. Not cowboys, the kind of men who got paid to watch things and discourage questions. They wore their guns the way men do when they want you to notice. One of them, blonde with a thin mustache, called down from the bank. "Where you headed, stranger?" Cole looked up from the creek. "South." "How far south?" Cole considered the man, then said, "Far as I need to go." The blonde man exchanged a glance with his partner. "You got business in this county?" "Personal business," Cole said. His voice was quiet, not aggressive, just final, the way a closed door is final. There was a pause, the kind of pause that could go several ways. Then the blonde man nodded, slow and deliberate. "Roads get rough south of here," he said. "Lots of things can happen to a man on his own." Cole looked at him for a moment. "I appreciate the concern," he said, and went back to his horse. The two riders sat there a beat longer than comfortable. Then they turned and rode north. Cole watched them go without moving his eyes from the middle distance, tracking their movement in his peripheral vision until they were clear of sight. Then he swung up into the saddle and pushed south again. He didn't know who those men worked for, but he had a feeling he could guess. And that feeling settled in his gut alongside the dust and the wind and the long road ahead, burning low and steady like a coal that refuses to go out. Red Spur was still hours away. The sun was moving fast. Harlan Price had a way of filling a room. Not with noise. He wasn't a loud man. He filled it with weight, with presence. Like the air itself rearranged slightly when he walked in, and everyone else adjusted without quite knowing why. He sat at the head of the long table in his ranch house, a house twice the size of any other in Lincoln County, built fast and built well because money makes things happen in a hurry, and he looked out the window at the morning light with the expression of a man reviewing an inventory. Across the table sat Walt Pruder, his foreman, a heavy-set man with small eyes and a flat way of speaking that stripped the emotion out of everything, which was why Harlan kept him close. "The boys made contact with a rider south of the creek," Pruder said, setting his coffee cup down. "Coming from the north. Heading south. Wouldn't give business or destination. Had a look about him." Harlan didn't turn from the window. A look, like a man with somewhere specific to be. Harlan was quiet for a moment. Then, description. Lean, dark, young, maybe 30, riding a bay with trail dust on it like he'd been going hard. Harlan turned from the window. He picked up his own coffee and held it without drinking, eyes moving to some middle distance that only he could see. Something shifted in his expression. Not concern exactly. More like a chess player noticing a piece he'd been tracking had moved. "Could be nothing," Pruder offered. "Could be," Harlan agreed. Then, "or it could be Cole Maddox." He said the name the way you say a word in a language you'd rather not speak. Flat. Careful. Pruder raised an eyebrow. That name means something? Harlan stood and walked to the window. It means something to Clara Holt, he said. Which means it means something to me. He had been thorough about Clara. That was his way with things he wanted thorough study before movement. He had learned about her father, the land, the bank debt. He had learned about her habits, her stubbornness, her integrity, which was one of the things that genuinely attracted him to her even as it frustrated him. And he had learned, through careful inquiry at the county post office and a small amount of money offered to the right man, that Clara Holt had sent a letter to a postal stop in Durango, Colorado, addressed to a C. Maddox, 6 months prior. He had not interfered with the letter. He wasn't that kind of man. At least, he told himself he wasn't. But he had kept the information close. And now it appeared the letter had reached its destination after all. Harlan turned back to Pruder. I need this resolved by tonight, he said. Clara's answer. The ring. The arrangement. I want it finished. Pruder nodded. And the writer? Harlan looked at him for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes that was hard to read. He was not, he told himself, a violent man. Violence was messy and created complications. He preferred leverage. He preferred inevitability. He preferred the kind of pressure that made people choose without realizing they'd been forced to. Watch him, he said finally. If he's heading to the Holt Ranch, let me know immediately. And if he gets there first? Harlan's jaw tightened for just a fraction of a second. Then it relaxed. He won't, he said. I'll visit Clara this morning, early, before she's had time to sit with whatever courage the night gave her. He smoothed his jacket, checked his watch, gold, heavy, engraved, and moved toward the door. Clara was in her garden when Harlan rode up. A small garden along the south side of the house, mostly practical things, herbs, a few vegetables fighting the dry soil. She straightened when she heard hooves and turned, shading her eyes against the morning sun. He looked prosperous and unhurried, which she knew was exactly the impression he intended. I came early, he said from the saddle. Didn't want you spending the whole day in suspense. He dismounted with easy grace and led his horse to her fence post, looping the reins in a single motion. I also brought something. He reached into his coat and produced a folded document. He held it out to her as he walked toward her, and she took it without quite meaning to, the way you take something when a hand reaches out before your mind catches up. She unfolded it. It was the deed to the Holt Ranch. Her name was already written on it. Signed it over to you this morning, Harlan said. Bought out the bank debt last week. Didn't mention it because I didn't want it to seem like pressure. He paused. A small, precise pause. It isn't pressure, Clara. It's a gift. Whether you marry me or not, the land is yours. Free and clear. Clara looked at the document, then at him. He looked back with an expression of such careful openness that it almost looked genuine. Then why offer it now? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Because I want you to understand something, he said. I'm not buying you. I never was. I want you to choose me because you decide I'm worth choosing. Not because you have no other option. He reached into his other pocket and produced the ring gold, set with a small dark stone. But I also want you to know, my feelings for you are real, and they won't survive indefinite waiting. I'm asking for your answer today. Tonight. Sundown, as I said. Clara held the deed. The paper was stiff and official and smelled like ink and money. She thought about the bank letters. She thought about the leaning fence posts and the shallow well and the long winter ahead. She thought about Cole's handwriting, rough and slanted and honest. And she thought about the empty road west. I'll have your answer by sundown, she said. Harlan nodded, took his horse, rode away. Clara stood alone in her garden, holding the deed to her own land, feeling like she'd been handed a trap she couldn't quite see. By midday, Cole was 12 miles out of Red Spur. His horse was tired and he knew it. The bay, whose name was simply Horse because Cole had never been much for elaborate naming, was a steady animal with more endurance than most, But 36 hours of hard travel across rough country was asking something real. Cole had stopped twice to rest him, rationing water from his canteen, keeping the pace to a sustained trot where the ground allowed. The land here had flattened out into classic high desert. Wide open. The sky took up more space than the earth. Clouds moved in slow formations from the west, deep-bellied and gray, hinting at weather that might arrive or might decide to go somewhere else. The wind came and went in pulses, carrying dust and the smell of dry sage. Cole ate in the saddle. Hardtack and dried beef. The kind of meal that kept you alive without doing much else for you. He was thinking about Clara. Not in the romantic, soft-focus way men sometimes think about women they love. He was thinking about her in the concrete, practical way you think about someone you're genuinely worried about. He was thinking about the last time he'd seen her, 14 months ago, the week before he left for the Colorado drive. They'd stood at the edge of her father's property in the last evening light, and she'd said, "Come back when you've got something, Cole. I'll be here." He'd heard it as a promise. He hoped he'd heard it right. He was thinking about Harlan Price. He knew the type. Had ridden for men like that in his younger years before he understood what he was riding for. Men who accumulated things not out of love for the things themselves but out of a deep and unquiet need to control the shape of the world around them. They were efficient, those men. Logical. They could make compelling arguments for why what was good for them was also good for you. The danger was that sometimes they were right about it. That was what made them effective. The gap between a man genuinely trying to help and a man engineering your gratitude was narrow enough that you could be standing inside it without knowing. He was thinking about what he'd offer her. This was the harder thought, because the honest answer was, not much. He had $230 saved, the trail money Eli had alluded to. Not enough to buy land outright in Lincoln County, but enough for a start. A stake. He had his skills with cattle and horses, which were real and transferable. He had no debt, no enemies he knew of, no bad habits beyond a tendency toward silence. He had his word, which he kept. He had his feelings, which were genuine. But standing those things beside a deed and a ring from Harlan Price was humbling in a way that sat uncomfortably in his chest. He thought, maybe I waited too long. Then he thought, maybe that's exactly what Price is counting on me to think. He straightened in the saddle and nudged horse a little faster. He was 6 miles out when he came across the old woman. She was sitting beside the road under a lean-to of canvas and sticks that shouldn't have been providing much shade but somehow was. Old, genuinely old, in the way of people who have outlived several versions of the world. She had a face like carved driftwood. She was selling nothing. Just sitting there watching the road the way people watch rivers. Cole pulled up, tipped his hat. "Afternoon, ma'am." She looked at him with dark, level eyes. "You're in a hurry," she said. "Yes, ma'am. Red Spur." He hesitated. "Nearby. Holt Ranch," she said. Not a question. Just a statement dropped flat like a stone. Cole was quiet for a moment. "You know it. Know every patch of ground in this county," she said. "And I know Clara Holt. Good woman. In a corner, though." She paused. Looked at him steadily. "You the man she wrote to?" Cole didn't ask how she knew. Some old women in that part of the world just knew things. It wasn't worth questioning. "I am," he said. She nodded slowly. "Price was at her place this morning. Saw him ride out." Another pause. "Left before 10. She didn't ride after him, so she hasn't given him his answer yet." Cole felt something loosen in his chest. Just slightly. "Thank you," he said. She waved a hand like she was shooing a fly. "Don't thank me. Just move." Then, as he was about to urge horse forward, she said, "Boy." He stopped. "Price has men on the road. 3 of them rotating. Between here and town." She looked at him steadily. "Main road isn't your safest route." Cole looked west, then east. "You know another way?" "There's a dry creek bed runs parallel to the road, about a 1/4 mile east. It cuts north of town and comes around the back of the ranch. Takes longer, but nobody watches it." He nodded. "East trail to the creek bed. Cut north of town. Don't get lost." The creek forks twice. Follow the left fork both times. He looked at her for a moment. Something in the old woman's face was hard to name. Not pity. Not invested interest. Something more like the calm of someone who watches the same story in different costumes, season after season, and still roots for it to end differently this time. Appreciate it, he said. Get there, she said simply. He turned east off the road, found the creek bed inside 15 minutes, and followed it north. The going was slower. Uneven ground, loose rock, the occasional brush that grabbed at his boots. But the route felt quiet, off the map of whatever Harlan Price had arranged. He moved through the empty afternoon, listening to the wind in the scrub, watching the sun move. It was past 2 o'clock. He had maybe 4 hours of daylight. The left fork, then the left fork again. And somewhere at the end of it, a woman standing at a window, waiting for something the horizon hadn't delivered yet. He kept riding. Clara had spent the afternoon making a decision, or trying to. She had cleaned the house, which she did when she needed to think. She had swept the floors, washed the windows, dragged the kitchen rug outside and beat the dust out of it against the fence rail. She had made bread she didn't particularly intend to eat, because the kneading was useful. There was something honest about bread dough. It pushed back exactly as hard as you pushed it. The deed from Harlan sat on the kitchen table. She had not touched it since morning. She kept looking at it the way you look at something you need to pick up but can't quite bring yourself to. It was a real document. She'd checked. The debt was gone. She had walked to the bank that afternoon, heart hammering, and the clerk had confirmed it with the particular awkward kindness of a man delivering good news that comes with complicated strings. The debt was cleared. The land was secured. Whatever else Harlan Price was, he had done what he said he would do. That was the hard part. He hadn't lied. Hadn't manipulated her, at least not in any way she could point to directly. He had been patient, present, generous in the material sense. He had offered her security at a time when she was terrified of losing the one thing her family had built. She was not a fool. She understood what she was feeling and she could name it. Relief about the land existing alongside dread about the cost of it. Because even if the ring was optional, even if Harlan had signed the deed freely, she understood that men like him did not do things without expectation. The gift was also a weight, a claim, a story he could tell about himself and about her. She had sat with the letter from Cole again. She could recite it by memory. She had gone to the window so many times that afternoon that she started feeling embarrassed by it. She wasn't a woman who waited helplessly. She had never been that woman. But this was different from helplessness. This was hope, which was its own particular kind of torture. Cole might not come. He might have moved on, found something or someone else in the long months of silence. He might have received her letter and decided the complications were too heavy. He might have had an accident on the trail. The West had swallowed men more capable than Cole Maddox without apology. She thought, I cannot build my life on a hope. Then she thought, I cannot build a life with a man I don't love. At 4 in the afternoon, she sat down at the kitchen table with both items in front of her. The deed, the letter. She looked at them for a long time. Then she heard hooves. She was at the window so fast she almost knocked her chair back. But it was Harlan. Coming early, or maybe she'd lost track of the time, because when she looked at the clock it was already past 4:30, and the sun was tilting toward the ridgeline with the particular golden-orange light that meant an hour, maybe a little more. He dismounted slowly. He was dressed well, as always. He carried his hat in his hand as he walked to her door, which she knew was deliberate, a posture of respect. She met him on the porch. I know it's a little early, he said. The smile. Careful. I couldn't stay away. Harlan, she said, and then stopped. He looked at her face and something shifted in his. Tightening. Small but real. He had been expecting something and he wasn't getting it. Clara, he said quietly. Tell me. I appreciate what you've done, she said. The debt, the deed, that was a generous thing. And I don't say that lightly. I know what it cost you. He waited. But I can't marry you, she said. I'm sorry. The silence that followed was the kind that had weight to it. Harlan looked at her for a long moment. His expression was controlled, that was the word for it, controlled, like a man who practiced reactions before he let them out. "Is there someone else?" he asked. She held his gaze. "Yes." His jaw moved, just slightly. "He's not here, Clara." "No," she agreed. "He's not." Harlan looked past her, toward the empty road. "He may not come," he said. And it wasn't quite a threat, wasn't quite a fact, sat somewhere in between. "I know," she said. He looked back at her. And for a moment, just a moment, something passed across his face that wasn't calculation or strategy. Something that looked almost like hurt. Genuine, unwanted, unexpected. She thought, maybe he really does feel something. And then it was gone, replaced by that controlled stillness. "The deed stands," he said. "I meant what I told you. It's yours." He placed his hat back on his head. He walked back to his horse. He did not look back at her as he rode away, which she thought was probably the most honest thing he'd done since he'd arrived in Red Spur. She stood on the porch and watched the road. The sun was still up, barely. The light was long and gold and quiet. And then, at the very edge of the road where it curved around the eastern bluff, she saw a shape. Moving. A rider. She stepped off the porch without thinking. Walked to the fence. Leaned against the top rail and stared. The rider came around the curve. The light hit him from the side, throwing a long shadow behind him and before him at once. She knew that posture. She would have known it across a mile of desert in pitch dark. Her hand tightened on the fence rail. The rider stopped at the edge of the property. He looked at her across the distance. She looked back. Neither of them moved. Then Cole Maddox took off his hat. He looked older. That was the first thing she noticed. Not older in a bad way, in the way that time looks on some men, adding dimension rather than damage. His face was more weathered, more settled. The lines around his eyes deeper from years of squinting into sun and distance. He was thin from the road, dusty. His horse was tired in the visible, honest way working animals get tired. He didn't ride forward. He waited, like he needed her to choose to close the distance. She walked out through the gate and across the road toward him, and when she was close enough to see his eyes clearly, she stopped. "You got my letter," she said. "I got it," he said. "Took time reaching me. I came as fast as I could." She looked at him. He looked back. Between them was the accumulated weight of 14 months. The drive, the silence, the letters, the waiting, the whole long story of two people who had been circling the same truth for years without quite landing on it. "Harlan Price just left," she said. Cole's eyes were steady. "I know. I saw him on the road." "You passed him. Watched him from the bluff east of here. Waited till he was gone." "Why?" A pause. "Because I didn't want our first conversation in 14 months to happen while he was still standing at your door. Some things deserve clear space." She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "He asked me to marry him," she said. "Offered to clear the ranch debt. Signed the deed over to me this morning." Cole absorbed this without visible reaction, but she saw something move in his eyes. Something complicated. The arithmetic of a man measuring what he had against what he was hearing. "Did you accept?" he asked. "No." Quiet. "The deed?" he asked. "It's mine regardless." He said he meant it as a gift. Cole looked down at his hat in his hands. He turned it once by the brim, a slow rotation. She had always noticed that about him, the way his hands moved when he was thinking. A small private tell. "Clara," he said and stopped, then tried again. "I've been turning over what I was going to say to you for 3 days of riding. Had whole speeches worked out. Good ones, I thought." He looked up. "Now I'm here and they all seem wrong. So just say the real thing," she said. He held her gaze. "I love you," he said, plain as weather. "Have for years. I should have said it before I left for Colorado. Should have said it before that, honestly. I kept waiting until I had something worthy to offer, and I think that was a mistake. I think I was afraid." He paused. "I'm not afraid anymore." She looked at him. "You've got $200 and a tired horse. His mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something realer than that. 230, he said. And no land. Not yet. And no house. Not yet. She looked at him for a long moment. The sun was nearly gone now, just a rim of orange fire along the ridgeline, painting everything amber and shadow. Harlan Price has a house, she said, not as an argument, as a fact she needed him to hold. I know, Cole said, and he'll find a woman who wants it. He stepped forward. Just one step, not pushing, just closing space. Clara, I'm asking you to bet on me. I know it's a bet. I'm not going to pretend it's a sure thing, but I'll work every day to make it one. She looked at him and thought about bets. She thought about the leaning fence posts and the shallow well. She thought about the long winters ahead, and what it would take to build something real from $230 and a piece of land with her name on it and the stubbornness she'd inherited from her father. She thought about the way Harlan Price's expression had controlled itself, the practiced openness, the precise smile. She thought about Cole Maddox at the edge of her property, waiting, refusing to come forward until she moved first. She thought about what it meant to be seen by someone without an agenda attached to the seeing. And then she said, "There's a barn needs a new roof." He blinked. "And a fence line that hasn't been walked in 2 months," she continued. "And a well that needs digging deeper before fall. And I need someone who knows horses because I've been managing with one borrowed animal and it's not working." He was watching her with an expression she couldn't entirely read. "I know how to do all of those things," he said carefully. "I know you do, Clara." "I'm saying yes," she said. "That's what I'm saying. I'm saying yes in the most practical language I know because I'm a practical person and I'm terrified and I need you to understand that the answer is yes." He was quiet for one beat. Then he stepped forward, closed the last few feet between them, and put his arms around her in the straightforward, unperformed way of a man who had wanted to do something for a very long time and finally had permission. She held on. Behind them, the last light left the sky. Around them, the desert went quiet the way it does at the very end of day. That particular silence that isn't empty but full, packed with the sounds of things settling and adjusting to the dark. Above them, the first star appeared. Down in Red Spur, Harlan Price rode back to his big house, alone, and sat at the head of his long table in the lamplight, looking at nothing. He would recover. Men like him always did. He would find another angle, another advantage, another name to add to his ledger. That was his nature, and it would not change. But tonight, for the space of one quiet hour, he would sit with the fact that all the money in Lincoln County couldn't purchase the one thing that had actually made him feel something. And across the 3 miles of dark desert between the ranch and the town, in the doorway of the Holt house with the lamplight glowing behind her, Clara stood looking up at the sky with a hand in Cole's hand. The deed was hers. The choice had been hers. And the future, uncertain, unfinished, real, was finally hers too. They married in the spring. Nothing grand. No flowers imported from somewhere east. No gold rings with dark stones. Just the preacher with the broken bell church, a few neighbors, and the open land stretching out in every direction the way it had always done. Indifferent and beautiful and permanent in a way that no human arrangement ever quite was. Cole spent the winter months repairing the fence line and digging the well deeper and putting a new roof on the barn. His hands, already rough from the trail, found new purposes in the cold mornings, the particular satisfaction of building something that would still be standing in 10 years. In 20, Clara managed the cattle and the books and taught Cole how she kept things organized, which took some time because his filing system was essentially his memory, which was good but not that good. They argued, sometimes about real things, sometimes about nothing. They worked through it in the way that two people work through things when they've chosen each other deliberately, with patience and honesty, and the understanding that staying is itself a daily decision. Harlan Price sold his Lincoln County operations the following year. He moved north, Wyoming, some said. Montana, said others. Nobody in Red Spur knew for certain, and after a while they stopped trying to track the answer. The Holt Ranch, still called that even after the marriage, grew slowly. Not dramatically, but steadily, which was the better kind. And years later, when people in the county told the story, and they did tell it the way people tell the stories that feel like they mean something, they always said the same thing. She could have had everything money could buy. She chose the man who showed up with nothing but his word and kept it. Some said she was foolish. Most said she was right. I think she was brave, because it's easy to choose certainty. It takes something else entirely to stand at the edge of a porch in the dying light, watching an empty road, and believe, against all reasonable evidence, that the person you're waiting for is still coming. And sometimes they are. Sometimes the road delivers exactly what you hoped for, at the last possible moment, covered in dust and slightly out of breath. Sometimes love arrives just in time. That's the thing about the West. It was a hard place, unforgiving place, but it was also a place where people built real things from nothing, where character meant more than inheritance, where a person's word was the only currency that never inflated, and where a woman with a deed in her hand and a cowboy at her gate could look at the horizon and decide that the life she wanted was worth the risk of reaching for it. What would you have done in her place? If the story stayed with you, let me know in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story like this one today, share it with them. We'll see you next time.